some already made terrain. I was 2 steps in while making it, and I was like, you know what? I need to make this on camera, because I actually started making these about 2 years ago where I didn't have the facility to make anything on camera. So I thought I'd go back. So I smashed out the top, which is some polyfiller and foam, and we're going to be making some real easy ash wastes terrain out of this, and then combining some with very easily with some Games Workshop kits to make them real hab modules built into the stacks of rock. So what I've got here is some cork bark that I just bought at my local pet shop. It comes in like varying lengths for varying amounts. You can get big long tubes of it that I've then just cut up with a hand saw, just getting this cylinder. Now, if you want to make something a bit jagged, like we're going to do here, I'm then going to start cutting it at an angle just to get a nice sort of coming out of the dunes stack of rock. So I've actually decided that I can't be bothered cutting it past this point with a saw. Now, that's under my mantra of always using the easiest route with terrain. So what I've done is I've got good old trusty hammer, and I'm going to smash bits off of it until it looks into the rough shape that I want. And that's one of the things that's quite nice about doing natural landforms. An element of randomness is actually beneficial to the design, if we can call it that. Well, that didn't work, did it? So let's get back to the saw and create that. So we're just going to start positioning the rocks on the base, and I'm just going to get a rough outline of what I sort of want. Now, any of these bits that fall off, I'm going to put into the tray or the box of cork that I just got as chip-ins, and actually they're really useful for just, instead of the mud that I use or the dirt that I use quite a lot, it's really useful for just bits floating about. Right, so overall I'd say that worked out all right. So we're going to get a base, which is, I've basically just cut a random shape out of MDF. I used 6mm, 9mm MDF just because that's what I had on hand. A lot of people use 6mm. I find it a bit too flexible and prone to warping. I've found with 9 it just never goes wrong, though it obviously stands out a bit more on the gaming table. Though if we're getting into the rolling ash waste, it shouldn't matter too much. And actually it's the size that I use for just everything on the channel, is this 9mm. That's one of the reasons, is because I do terrain for events and I just want things to be as sturdy as possible. So I just never have to worry about it. I can just throw it into a box at the end of an event and just put it away for 6 months with things on top of it. So yeah, 9mm MDF is my choice. But obviously there's 6mm acrylic or even plastic hard, depending on how much wear and tear your terrain at home is going to be using. So next up for the steps, once we've got our base sorted, is to position the pieces of cork. Now, I just start playing around with arrangements, and this is one of the things with terrain, it just requires messing about with random shapes until you find one that's pleasing to you. And you'll just think, oh yeah, that looks right, what I was going for. And I sort of half find this with this piece of terrain and try and secure it with a hair bobble. And then like, no, that's just ruined it. So I position them again, actually get one that I like a bit more, and try out a few different things. And I'm going to start gluing them down then with a hot glue gun. Now, sometimes I glue things down with no more nails or some sort of adhesive, like building adhesive like that. Hot glue guns aren't as sturdy, I find, but are obviously just really readily available. They don't clog up all the time. So it's quite good, especially when we get to further steps, because we're going to be using expanding foam and some grout. They'll provide additional purchase and adhesive to the base for what we want and really make an overall sturdy piece of terrain. So when you start out your pieces of terrain, you sort of think how all the things that are going to go into them, and that might allow you to minimize some other steps, like utilizing hot glue gun has here. Next, we need to provide
a top surface to the rock stacks. So I'm going to do that by utilising expanding foam and basically just filling all of the inside surface with expanding foam. Now, the expanding foam I had here is a bit old, so it didn't really expand that much. So I knew I could just fill it up to near the top. Now, if you do sort of like get foam cascading over, which I got in quite a lot of the previous stacks that I built, because as I said before, this is one that I've gone back to, you can just rip off the top bit of foam that's spilt out. Obviously, just take care to leave it in an area where it won't ruin anything else if the foam does explode everywhere. And once we get to a level that we're happy with, we just leave it there and give it a bit of time to expand outwards, and we'll get basically something that we can then fill on top of to provide playable surface on top of the rock stack. So next, the thing that we're going to be putting on top of the expanding foam is polyfiller. And I've just got this pot of polyfiller that is pre-mixed. You can go out and get it much cheaper in bags and mix it with water yourself. Spac filler, I think it's called for everyone in the States. Basically, we're just going to spread this over the top, and what that is going to do is just seal that foam so we can then use spray cans on top. Now, if you're going to paint this with a brush, like say you're going to dab on and stipple paint, and so sort of do a different painting method that I'm going to do in this video, because you prefer that effect, you might not need this, because then we're going to actually put another layer over the foam. But for what I wanted to do, this polyfiller just very easily just filled the top of it. And a lot of the things that I sort of do in terrain is trying to give an easy approach for myself so that I can produce multiple tables worth of terrain, so there's a lot of variation in what I'm doing, and also keep things quite cheap, easy, and actually enjoyable in the terrain build process, because there's lots of things that we tend to do in the hobby that can be a chore, and terrain can be viewed as one of them for some people, and actually using easy effects to get a big bang for your buck tends to be, for me, one of the most enjoyable parts of the hobby, is making this terrain for us to fight on. So next for the process, after that's cured, set, hardened, which is only about 15 minutes for polyfiller, I'm then going to coat the rocks, and I'm just going to spray it using basically just any spray cans that had natural tones that came to hand. So I start off with a dark grey. This is a Whole Foods spray can of just a dark grey. I think it's their Artworks range, but it can just be absolutely anything. Now, if there's been a bit of a gap in the polyfiller, say under the crevice that I put on the side, if that melts away a bit of the foam there, I really don't care. I then go to the next spray can that came to hand, which was an ossified earth from Colourforge. Their matte black range is absolutely excellent, and it's something that I use on all the models that I do. So if you want to grab Colourforge sprays, there is an affiliate link below where you can support the channel that little bit in your purchases and buy it directly from Colourforge, which is one of the cheaper routes of doing it. Finally, I then do a very light Wraithbone colour from Games Workshop. And feel free, honestly, to use, especially in these natural landforms, any that you think is right. I almost didn't give the colours for the video that I was going to use, because what looks natural to you and to your eye is the most important thing, and almost just a randomness of colour ties into that. So the next thing I thought it would be nice doing is incorporating some of the ash waste hab modules into the pieces of terrain. I did this very simply and got some ash waste habs. I actually got them from the War Office. If you are interested in the War Office, they're actually sponsoring this video, so big thanks to them. An affiliate code to their store is linked below, where you can support the channel with purchases through them. Essentially what I did was I took the hab modules and used Builder's Adhesive, No More Nails in the UK is what I used, squirted it on and stuck them onto the sides of the cliffs. Some of them required a little chopping out, and I've not got footage of it because unless it's within this studio, I'm going to have to work on some better ways of filming, because you could see absolutely nothing from what I'm doing. But if you've managed to put together any of the new kits, such as just plucking from my head the Van Sar with those blooming tiny neck rings, I'm sure you'll be able to work it out. And really, this video is focusing on those rock piles, and it's just additional adornment to those rock piles that I added with the Hab modules. I would have liked to get footage, but sometimes we just got to roll with the punches and carry on with the build, or in this case, the video. For any buildings that I'm going to be doing on this terrain, I grab Army Painter Leather Brown, and the reason I'm using this is because I started using it on some other Ashways terrain, and so that just informed the colour selection here. What it does is when we spray this as the base, it allows me to just put that Wraithbone again over the top in sort of a light dusting, and it'll give a nice gradient between the very top colour of the Wraithbone and then this rust colour underneath, and it gives it sort of a natural tone. As you can see, I'm excellent at filming outside the studio of where I'm going to be filming. Now, I got this sort of 2-colour combination approach from Guerrilla Miniature Games, doing a video about painting his own terrain, and you just sort of keep it about 30 centimetres away. I spray this a bit too heavily here, but you can just keep it 30 centimetres away to 60 centimetres away, to 1 foot to 2 foot for American listeners and anyone on the good old Imperial units, Freedom units. And basically that will just, instead of solidly coating the model and getting rid of that leather brown colour, it'll give it sort of a speckled, dappled effect that just suggests a bit of natural weathering going on, and it gives a really stark effect for its usage of only 2 colours. It really outsizes the effort put in. So that then goes on to just painting the details of the buildings that are on the terrain. Because I've used the Wraithbone or any lighter colour, it doesn't have to be Wraithbone. Don't get yourself tied in to only using Wraithbone because contrast paints use Wraithbone. I'm contrast painting them. It will take on a bit of the undercolour of the model, but actually that's a benefit. It harmonises all the colours underneath the contrast paint, and having such a vibrant contrast paint colour on such neutral colours of the rocks and the buildings, although yes, they're going to stand out from the terrain and maybe it should be more camouflaged, is the stuff that goes on in my head when I'm doing stuff like this, but it just gives it a nice visual pop on the table. And I'm just going to move through any bits that I think need to be painted, mainly these cargo strapped things on the side. I don't know why you'd store stuff outside like that, but it looks cool and it gives a bit of that visual interest. So I'm just going to move through the model, painting it with contrast paint, being easily done by this contrast that we set up from the 2 previous spray paints. One thing that I am thinking about as we go through it is the usage of complementary colours. So I pull out my trusty colour wheel, and after I've selected that first colour of red, which is always a good one to put on like fuel cans, things like that, I'm just going to pick a split complementary colour. So I'm going to go with like a yellow green, which is Mantis Warriors green. The red that I've used is Flesh Tearers red. And then I'll use a blue, which, reaching for my paint from the rack, is Talisar blue. So just whacking those on, and you don't have to be too neat with them. It's sort of just a paint by numbers, isn't it, with a contrast paint, especially when we're on terrain. So just have a nice little relax, put on some music, turn off my stupid voice, and just get on with painting the bits of detail. Now, you don't need to do every single bit of detail on the terrain. Having some washes that come later will solve that and make the model look much more detailed than you're actually putting the effort into, and we'll just get through this process. Now, the final couple of steps that we're going to go through is both an oil wash and also the basing of the model. And you can sort of do these interchangeably depending on what end result you want for your model. Now, I did this in a conservative way, which is I put my oil wash, it's very, very thin. I can't give you how thin it is of the actual wash, because I sort of just did it randomly and what looked right as I was putting it on. As you can see from the first piece of rocks, I just slap it on and test it out on the actual terrain, and then, oh no, it's much too strong, so I then just dilute it some more. And I'm just going to go through all the pieces of terrain and test it out, mix up some more, and keep going. And it will just pick out that detail. Because we've used the cork bark, it will soak in, so actually not be as stark of a change in the end result, but it will just sort of mute the colour. And for any Games Workshop pieces of plastic that we put it on, it's going to just pick out those details. Now, when I say this is interchangeable with the next step, that's because the basing material that we're going to use is grout, and I use a very light coloured grey grout because it's ash waste. I wanted a fine grit particulate size, so that will actually take to the oil paint fine. So if you want to match colour to a board, you might want to do, if you know that your board's darker grey, do that first and then put the oil wash on. And like me, if I was being conservative with it, I don't mind doing this step twice. So I do it on the cork bark, and then I'm going to do the grout second. And if it then doesn't match the board, I'll just put some more oil wash on. It's not too much of a problem. Like, I was more concerned about getting the terrain finished at this point. We have a rolling road scenario that basically we wanted to get done, because I'm always doing this for sort of projects for putting on the table and filming games. So I wanted to get it done for our Necromunda gaming day. So I just got them done. Now, as we get into the actual grouting part, so as we get into the grouting part of the video, what I'm going to do is put PVA glue on all the bases and just paint it on. I'm then going to sprinkle grout onto the base. I'm going to then spray that with more water and PVA mix. I've also added some IPA into that to break the surface tension and make it flow better into the grout. Now that's things that I've picked up on like Luke's APS and other terrain masters. And it does help it infiltrate the grout more and get that more solid covering. Now, I've done this to do this terrain en masse, is I've covered my 6x4 gaming table with a bunch of bin bags so that I can just sprinkle it over, get overspray. And having sprayed it with the PVA and water mix, it'll just harden that grout up on the top. It's already stuck on the bottom, and it will give us some nice shades. Now, as you can see from the video, I put on like a beige colour first. I did this as a test out and I was like, oh, it's the wrong colour. Now, I just finished off that piece so that within the piece, it was just like a harmonised colour. It didn't just have a spot that was that beige. And I'm not too worried about making this mistake as we go through. The grout will bleed that colour through the grout, but actually just having this natural variation through the basing materials as well, again, not too worried about, and just the final product will just have a variation of colour. It might be staining from under the desert, something that's been blown over with the ash. It might be a different colour oxidisation effect from underneath the ash, something that's been covered up. And again, it's just something that you take the Bob Ross style and just make your happy little accidents and enjoy the terrain build process. And with that, we're going to get a finished piece of terrain. So those are the final pieces of our terrain put together. And here are some shots of the terrain in use. We played a rolling road scenario for the ash waste. And actually, I'm very happy with how these turned out. Now, you can see within the shots, the grout is very light. Now, this is where I was coming into saying it's got to be to your own tastes. And sometimes you just have to reverse the process of with the oils going on first or second. Because what I am actually going to do is go back and oil over the grout. And that's something that I'll actually do in the future, depending on whether or not I just buy another more appropriate ash waste mat. Because that mat that you see in there is more city ruins like. But yeah, I was quite happy with the results. It's some nice easy terrain to build, and hopefully you enjoy the process too. And I'll catch you on the next video. See you in a bit.